Welcome. Well, it's 11:25, Angie. We're going to get going. So this is Angie Redekop. Angie's an instructor at Ambrose University, and my name is Joni Avram. I am also an instructor at Ambrose, and I am a owner of Cause and Effect Marketing, which is a marketing company here in Calgary, and I've been one of the organizers of the Soul Forum. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We are getting our bearings with this online conference, and we're doing pretty well. It's not without its a few glitches, but overall I'd say we're doing pretty well. And what we're going to do today is, first of all, I'm going to just do a short introduction of the session. We'll introduce the speakers. We're going to have our panelists present formally. Each one of them will have 5 minutes, and then we'll have a lively conversation, which will include some chat and Q&A from you as well as myself that I'll moderate. And Angie here is here to help with all that moderation and Zoom communication. So with that, I will formally begin our session. So we're talking today about the gig economy, and I was actually doing some math today or yesterday and realized that I probably spent 80% of my career in gig work, which is, for me as a solo entrepreneur, it's been very fruitful and I've enjoyed it. I'm wired for gig work, but not everyone is. And we know that some people choose this kind of work and some people are forced into it. And so what we want to talk about today is how there is opportunity within the gig economy, or some people are calling it the shared economy, but there's also challenges, and those are very real challenges as well as opportunities. So some of the things we've identified in terms of opportunity includes flexibility and choice, even being able to choose the projects you take on. But then in terms of the challenges, we've got financial instability, and you've got few or no benefits. And so how do we manage those issues? So this morning, we're going to explore how this gig economy, if it's a trend that that is unstoppable, then how do we make sure that we help individuals and businesses thrive within it? And that's the big question we've asked our moderators, or our panelists to discuss today. So I'm going to introduce everyone, and then we will get going. Chris Kneeland, maybe Chris, if you can take your video or join us now. Hi, Chris. Chris is the co-founder of Communo, which is an online marketplace which helps creative, digital, and marketing agencies and freelancers operate more profitably. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining us. Parisa Mahboubi is a senior policy analyst who leads the C.D. Howe Institute's Human Capital Policy Council, and she's focused on social policy, demographic, skills, education, and labor market issues. And Timothy Wild is a registered social worker who is interested in how transformative social policy can promote and maintain a more just, humane, and inclusive society. So thank you all again for joining us. We have given you each 5 minutes to make your formal kind of presentation commentary on the big question. I'm going to actually start in order with the people as I've introduced you. So I'm going to let Chris go first. And with that, I'm going to mute myself and let Chris have the floor.
Thank you. And I'll, you said I can share my screen here. So we'll just put a couple of little talking points up here. Does everybody see that? Yeah, and you can hear me okay? I can't hear any of you anymore. You're all on mute. So I'm a big believer that COVID has been a wonderful accelerant of a macro socioeconomic trend towards contingent work. I'm least excited about what I would call gig work, which is, in my definition, somebody who has a full-time job and is looking for incremental income on nights and weekends. And I'm much more excited about sort of the rise of the freelancer and the entrepreneur and the self-employed individual who is no longer dependent upon an established institution for their primary source of income. And I'm excited about it for 3 reasons. The first has to do with volatility. I think that we have entered an era of excessive volatility. My particular expertise is in the creative marketing, digital sort of space. And so digital has been disrupting industries for 20 years now. But if you were to look in a crystal ball and kind of look out the next 10 years for any established industry, I see nothing but heightened levels of volatility. The disruption has been exponential. And when that is the case, when executives or companies or employees or freelancers are unable to accurately predict the future, that type of volatility demands, as an economic principle, variability. We have to get away from fixed expenses, fixed costs that we must start to adopt on-demand, open-sourced, readily available to turn on or off, and a big part of that is talent. And so, if you want to argue about, well, no, actually the world is getting more and more predictable, then I think we could entertain a conversation that says corporations should start entertaining more and more fixed expense in the form of labor. But if you can suspend your disbelief and subscribe to my ideology that as things get more and more unpredictable, all you really need is access to talent. You don't need to have full-time talent, and the tools have never been easier to access talent in a matter of hours in what usually took weeks or months in a more traditional HR model. So the second point would then be desirability, almost regardless of whether or not you think variable models are the future. We do know he or she who has the best talent wins. And I think COVID has opened people's mind to amazing talent doesn't have to come into the office every day. Amazing talent doesn't have to live in your same city. Amazing talent doesn't have to want to work for your corporation full time. So what we really want is just the best of the best. And our ability to access specialists, true experts with niche skill sets is very, very attractive. And so businesses can do more with less by finding people who are simply better at the job than their current labor pool, or whatever their local colleges are kicking out, or whatever their local industry supports. So people who no longer have to make these Sophie choice decisions about working for a great company or working in a great city, or having a home versus an urban apartment and all these types of things. We can now live and work where we want and work with the best brands or on the coolest projects or with the most interesting people. So this gig mindset really amplifies desirability. And then finally is affordability. The tech sector was really the first to kind of acknowledge the benefits of offshoring big technical projects to places like India or the Philippines or South America, where there's lower cost talent. Manufacturing has been offshored for decades, where you can get lower cost manufacturing capabilities. But now we're seeing professional white collar workers also be accessed offshore. Most notably here in Canada, despite COVID and despite, oil tanking, the foreign exchange rate has stayed very attractive for American firms to access Canadian talent at about a 25 to 30% discount, just given the foreign exchange rate. So as businesses are scrambling to try to find ways to do more with less, by opening their minds to a contingent workforce or gig workers, they can now go into other countries. And I would argue Canada is just a no-brainer. Comparable time zones, same language, comparable culture, world-class education and talent. And so I've never met a company that wasn't looking for a way to save some money, and now they're being more exposed to some of the benefits that other countries possess. And so for those reasons, I'm a huge believer that we're just scratching the surface of a macro revolution that's going to kind of make most employees contingent workers within the next 5 years.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris. So we are on the scratching the surface of this new economy becoming the norm for everybody. That's what I heard you finish with. And Parisa, we're gonna move on to you and your presentation.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you all for joining. Let me start with giving some background about gig economy in general. Since the previous recession in 2008-2009, the so-called gig economy has been growing globally and in Canada. And the shifts toward gig work is mainly due to technological and economic changes and the desire for greater flexibility by workers and employers. Although measuring the gig economy is not an easy task and there are inconsistency in reporting due to variation around defining gig workers. For example, estimates for Canada shows estimates for Canada ranges from 8% from StatCan to 30% from Bank of Canada. But there is a consensus that the size of gig economy is expected to grow, and this is even prior to the COVID crisis. And I'm with Chris on that the COVID would intensify the shifts towards more gig work. Generally, gig work has advantages and disadvantages that make it appealing to some workers, but not suitable for others. In general, gig work is not, but one thing that is important to understand is that gig work is not tied to a certain characteristic in terms of age, gender, or education. Gig workers are spread across the entire age and education spectrum, but not necessarily evenly, since their distribution depends on the type of gig work and work arrangement. In regards to advantages, we all heard about that, and we all know that gig work offers a great range of flexibility and independence that can provide work-life balance. Another benefit of gig economy is creating more options and opportunities that might be better fit for workers' lifestyle, skill set, in terms of also flexibility in terms of time and location. And these type of work is associated with low barriers to entry. Employers basically, even the statistics shows that 60 to 80% of gig workers engage in independent work by choice. But the downside of the gig economy, however, is the lack of financial security and predictability, paid sick leave, other benefits, and workplace protections. It seems that workers generally face a trade-off between flexibility and independence needed for the modern workplaces on one hand, and the financial security and benefits offers in the traditional employment model on the other. The COVID pandemic indeed has highlighted the need for a stronger safety nets for workers involved in non-standard employment and precarious work, including gig workers. To address issues around financial security, government in a jurisdiction such as Europe and California has recently decided to apply traditional employment and employee models and reclassify many gig workers and independent contractors as employees. The potential consequences of such changes in classification of workers in the gig economy are not clear yet, but several outcomes are possible, including reducing flexibility for workers and businesses, so reducing satisfactions in that regard, limiting market entry, job losses, and even hours cut that can all affect the growth of non-standard work and its potential key role in post-COVID-19 economic recovery. We need to encourage job creation. We need to reduce unemployment rate, and gig economy can help in that regard. Previous CD Howe Institute research highlights the idea that Canada should focus on policies that provide proper supports for workers in non-standard jobs, for example, through an expanded employment insurance system, while maintaining a dynamic labor market. my final point is that the key understanding to the gig economy and making appropriate policy decisions to support the economy and gig workers is to have access to better, more comprehensive data that includes all types of work arrangements. The current legal employment framework currently is outdated, so it's really time to consider more diverse employment classifications to be able to set out employment laws and develop social security frameworks suited to each category. I'm going to conclude my points and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Parisa. Now, Tim Wild is going to join us. Tim, are you? I don't see you here, Tim. Tim, are you able to share your video with us? There you are. And I think you stay still muted. Floor is yours, Tim. Oh, you're still.
He wasn't muted. His audio is just not working. Tim, your audio, we're not hearing you.
Tim, one option you might have is to call in with your phone. 2 minutes. We'll wait. I would ask a question. I just don't want to get too engaged in a conversation, and depending on when Tim's going to join us again. But maybe Angie, do you and I want to have a little back and forth while we wait for Tim?
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay. So anything from those first two conversations that stand out for you?
I guess it's interesting, and there's a couple comments in the chat too, the need or the question about whether there's a need for more government involvement in terms of the gig economy. It sort of seems like it's something that you want to kind of let run, on its own, but then unemployment issues, like there's just a lot of pieces in the background that may lead to certain groups of people being affected negatively, I guess, by these short-term type jobs. So trying to wrestle that one in my mind.
Yeah, for me, it's as a mom of 2 adult children now who are just entering the workforce. It's been interesting for me to see them not necessarily embrace this opportunity as a big, exciting adventure, but more, I think it's a kind of a scary experience for a lot of kids who are used to things being a certain way and don't know quite how to navigate this new world. And even for them who don't have a frame of reference that is, having worked in a certain way for 20 years, even they, I think, are finding it to be a little overwhelming because there's so much opportunity and maybe the options are too wide. And I'm curious, I'm just curious if that's a concern, if anyone else finds that to be a concern. Maybe Tim now. So Angie, I'm gonna let you and Parisa talk. I'm gonna help Tim get reconnected. So I'm gonna put so I'll let you guys take it away.
I guess if I can jump in, Chris would be interested, I guess, in your feedback on, do do you see it for I guess particularly younger people or people re-entering a different workforce? Do you think it's more opportunities, or do you think it's more uncertainty? I know it's both, but how does
Well,
a
I think
person coming in?
it's a paradigm shift. That we know three things. So we have thousands of freelancers that join our platform called Communo, and we're always surveying them and trying to understand what makes them tick. There's two overwhelmingly huge barriers for why more people aren't more enthusiastic about going into self-employment or freelance or gig work. And it's always the same two things. Number one, they are intimidated about sales. They do not know how to sell themselves, price themselves, position themselves. So they aspire to have the lifestyle of an independent contractor. They aspire to have the freedom. They aspire to be able to work with brands outside of their geographic area. Everything about it sounds better to them. And particularly in Canada, we don't see the health insurance issue as much as you would in the States because of obviously socialized medicine. So if they can overcome the obstacles around business development, which is what a lot of platforms like Communo do, there's literally hundreds of millions of dollars of work available, kind of like an Uber driver. An Uber driver doesn't have to worry about drumming up business. He just has to make sure that there's enough demand on the platform to make it worth his time. And they go different day parts and they drive to different parts of the city, but the work is just coming. So most freelancers want to be able to service opportunities, not sell and create opportunities. And then the second one is just business acumen. And this is where school has failed these students and these young professionals of, we're still dealing with industrial revolution paradigms that are over 100 years old that reward compliance, that reward somebody else is going to take care of me. My job is to be a cog in somebody else's machine. And so when you get these freelancers, and particularly my members, remember, we're designers, coders, videographers, photographers, writers. These are artists. They don't have MBAs. They hate Excel. They don't understand revenue recognition and accounting principles and tax deferral strategies and all those kinds of things that actually make self-employment financially feasible. So we're trying to create an infrastructure and a community that makes those elements of just being a savvy business owner, make sense. I have a 16-year-old kid who thinks that he's going to make money delivering pizzas. It's like, well, if you actually thought through the wear and tear in your car and the gasoline and the expenses and like what's your hourly rate actually going to be, and they don't think that way. They just think, oh, I'm going to make $20 an hour. They don't know that they're spending $12 an hour on expenses, so they really only made $8. And so I think we have I'm disappointed, particularly in the educational system, that we're still worrying about old school tactics when what we should be doing is educating people for an entire different society in which you're going to be thriving on some of your own wits and some of your own acumen that right now the only way to learn is through the school of hard knocks.
That's good. Thank you. As an educator, I like that. Everybody's going to become an entrepreneur. Joni, I see a phone there.
We are back with Tim, and Tim, it looks like you've got you're connected by phone now.
Yes, I am.
All right, so Tim, we don't see your face, but we do hear your voice. So go ahead.
The 3 points I like to make is the importance of language, and I think it was kind of picked up a bit on Chris's last point about pizza guys. I'm a social worker who deals with social policy and poverty initiatives, and I think the word gig economy kind of creates a bit of a fun, positive term. It kind of almost makes the social and economic relationships sound less oppressive, that it's normalized, it's made desirable, that people can get a job and another job and another job. And I think it's important because the people I deal with who are quote unquote in the gig economy, those terms, those words mask survival jobs, piecework and precarious work. And they also have, in my experience, a gender and racial balance. So I think language has to be included. Secondly, looking at some of the consequences of economics and the social dimensions is one of the reasons we have a minimum wage isn't that people shouldn't pay less than that, is that workers can't work for less than that, because there's always this momentum to kind of say, well, I can work for a dime less or a quarter less. and this can go on. And I think we need to put wages in the context of social policy, to kind of allow it to be part of a poverty reduction strategy, as opposed to a lot of gig work on the lower end, which is essentially part of a poverty maintenance strategy. Generally, there's no career advancement, and we talk about learning, but learning wouldn't help. Perhaps what might help in these situations is if we had greater recognition of international credentials. But as it stands, I think lower end gig work is certainly adding to the poverty wages. And finally, I think in terms of social justice and economic justice, I think we have to look at the relationship of work to income. And this may have been mentioned before about ideas about basic income, universal income programs. That's one possibility. Secondly, is to put work within context of a comprehensive social and economic policy, which does include things like basic income. And finally, there was a Zimbabwean historian called Terence Ranger, and he was doing a review of books, and he wrote that quite often people talk about giving voices to the voiceless. And he says, well, that's not really important, because actually the voiceless are quite vociferous. What we actually need is ears for the earless. And I think, when we're looking at education, we have to educate people about the consequences of this entrepreneurship of self. So those are my basic points. Sorry for all the hassles with my technology, and thank you.
That's not a worry. Thank you, Tim. Thanks for that. So we've heard three very different perspectives, and we've got three people who are still going to be part of this conversation going forward, as well as the people who are on chat. So I'm going to start with my first question, and I'm going to get all of the speakers to just unmute themselves. And what I'd like to see now is a pretty cross-sectional kind of conversation where everyone just jumps in and takes their turn answering this particular question, because I think it really flows nicely from the morning session with Janet Lane. And it's really around the question of education and who's responsible for education going forward. Is this a organizational responsibility where organizations are responsible for educating their workforce, or is it the workforce's responsibility for self-education and continuous education? And how do those two dynamics and tensions work together? I'm gonna throw that out at you guys, and I'll let whoever speaks up first has the first answer.
I wonder what the role of...
Go ahead, Tim.
Thanks, Chris. I wonder what the role of the state is. That wasn't mentioned. The state to provide a critically conscious society rather than a labor force. Decouple education specifically from the work, but provide transferable work skills. And, I still believe that's a state responsibility, where if it's left up to the individuals and or corporations, I think we miss a lot of people. And we also miss, I think, the beauty of a well-educated population. And Chris's opening points, he made a great point about the United States and Canada. People come here because of a well-educated workforce. So I don't see it as either individual or corporation. I see it more as a basic right of citizenship.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really think that everybody needs to assume responsibility for their own career and lifestyle. I wish that the government at least didn't hamper or hinder our ability to be successful. But, I think some of the systems around taxation and insurance are two examples where the government has not contributed to an environment that makes it more friendly. I think the days of relying on corporations to do something on our behalf are over, and that's one of the problems, is that people have had inappropriate amounts of trust. I do not subscribe to the idea that corporations provide more financial stability. I'm self-employed, and I'm never going to be blindsided by a pink slip on a Friday afternoon saying that the headquarters is relocated, or the product market fit has gone away. And I have more visibility and control over my revenue streams than if I was just wholly dependent upon an employer who was making decisions, or susceptible to scandal, or susceptible to the whims of a C-suite that I have no influence over. So I do think that individuals need to spend more time getting educated. And I think, unfortunately, the more entrepreneurial we become as a society, the less attractive or appealing thousands of dollars of post-secondary education makes sense, because that's really a certification process for the old guard, for the established regime. But if the established regime changes the paradigms, and now Google certifications or micro certifications or social proof can allow people to hire with confidence, then a Harvard degree means less. Or I actually think the Harvards of the world would be just fine. But when we've already seen a huge decline in sort of liberal arts schools and smaller post-secondary programs because they have Harvard-like prices, but they don't have the Harvard-like benefit. And so, I think that we are responsible as a capitalistic free market society to create new tools and platforms that allow people to get the training they need on their own.
Parisa, do you want to jump in?
Absolutely. I think I'm totally okay with Chris in terms of everyone is responsible for educating. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to invest in our training and lifelong learning, because this is really important to be able to function in the labor market that is changing quickly and requires more frequently requires a specific sets of skills. But at the same time, some individuals may face some barriers that government and organizations, businesses can support them and encourage workers to participate in training programs. So it can be basically something that all individuals, businesses, and governments can contribute to. But this is definitely something that people should be willing to and wants to educate themselves. That is really important. But the issue in terms of investment in education and training of workers, even in traditional workplaces, we have seen a decline in the investment in training. And one of the reasons is that employer may be concerned about, okay, I'm going to train this worker, and soon after a few years, the person will leave the organization, join another organization. But one thing is that educating the whole basically investment in development of the labor force is going to benefit all organizations. Yes, maybe one worker leaves one organization to another, but the same organization is going to hire a worker from another organization who had opportunity of training. So this is really important to invest in that specific area. But when it comes to gig economy, although education and certification really matter for traditional workplaces, but when we look at gig workers, their income and levels of skills and education, there is no specific link between labor market outcomes, successful labor market outcomes in terms of earnings and education level. It's more related to experience and skills that they can obtain. So this is also something that to keep in mind when we just focus on gig economy.
Okay, so maybe I'd like to throw that up there in terms of a next question, which is whether or not gig work or project work, contract work, shared work, whatever we want to call it, is disproportionately disadvantageous to lower skilled workers. And how do we overcome that challenge in terms of overall fairness and equality? Comments on that?
I'd like to just to highlight something about that. Even I mentioned during my when I shared my thoughts about the gig economy. What we see is that there is no specific in terms of education, there is no specific group that are more likely to be involved in the gig economy. But we need to highlight that there are, gig economy is quite broad, and we have different type of work arrangements and type of gig workers. So when we focus on one type of gig work, it's possible that we see, for example, a higher share of low skilled individuals compared to different type of gig work. So when we talk about gig economy as a whole, we need also we may not see in the data that necessarily one specific individuals with, for example, low skilled workers are in the wrong position or they are disadvantaged. But when we look at some specific type of gig worker, yes, it is possible that we see a higher portion of low-skilled individuals. But as I said, it's going to create some job opportunities for them. We know that the economy is changing. Even traditional traditional jobs, they are going to be less likely available to low-skilled individuals because of the shift automation. So the demand for a skill is really high, and these low-skilled individuals, it's possible for them to become displaced and face long-term unemployment and are not able to find any job. But gig economy is going to provide some jobs at least for them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think the goal of the gig economy is not to make low-skilled workers valuable. I think every economy should encourage workers to upskill and to become expert in a particular area. What the gig economy does is it's provided incremental options for people that are looking for supplemental income. So I can now rent out my basement on Airbnb. I couldn't do that 10 years ago. That's an income stream that didn't exist to me. I can now work on a Saturday night delivering Skip the Dishes, and I couldn't do that before. So I think options are almost always good. What I like particularly about the gig economy is not what it does for the low-skilled worker, but what it does for the high-skilled worker with a non-traditional circumstance. It could be somebody that's caring for an aged parent. It could be somebody that's retired. It could be somebody that has a handicap or a disability. It could be somebody that lives in a tertiary market but wants to work on a first world market problems. So what it does is it's just created more opportunities for those with skills to find jobs in non-traditional categories, communities, companies, etc.
I do wonder though, when it comes to the ideas of low skill, I know there are a lot of new Canadians who have high skills, whose credentials aren't recognized by the accrediting bodies, and they don't necessarily have the time to upgrade to Canadian standards when they have to work to survive. So I don't think a lot of people, once again, Chris, I am dealing with people on the lower end of the gig economy, but these aren't people who are dealing with supplemental economy. Quite often they don't have the basement they can rent out. The cars are functional at best. So I think that when we use these words, we have to be pretty careful, because there's a difference between somebody delivering a pizza to make a living and, Princess Anne going to a gig opening Covent Gardens. So I think that the language itself is problematic, and the more problematic it is, and there's more pressure that people can get a gig job, get another gig job, it kind of cuts into things, and it has deleterious consequences in terms of the health of the person, but overall social health of our society.
Tim, what kind of language would you prefer to hear or see?
Well, I don't think there was any problem in the language before. When my father, who was an engineer, was a consultant, he was a consultant. It wasn't called a gig, right? So I think the gig, in order to kind of almost democratize the notion, is become a useless term because it's so broad. So I think, there are survival jobs, which I don't think anyone doing them would say, well, it's a gig. So I think the language is problematic. And as we move more and more to what the gig economy, quote unquote, needs, I don't think we're necessarily taking into attention the segments of people who are working those so-called jobs. Chris mentioned before about thoracic surgeons for high caliber athletes. That's certainly a niche. But how can we kind of create it so that it's not exclusively based on income, so that there are ways, so that we do have ongoing education, so we do have comprehensive social policies, so we do have income support and income replacement programs. But I don't think the words gig economy help anybody.
So one thought I have is around, so as an entrepreneur, I have, like Chris was saying, I'm not concerned about selling. I've learned how to sell. I've learned how to do the work, and I've learned how to look for opportunities and find kind of where the puck's going as opposed to where the puck is, to use a sport analogy. but that takes some time. And one of the things that I'm interested in as a professor, so I've started teaching new students who are, they're less than 20 years old. And when you say to them, every one of you is going to have to be in the selling mode for most of your life, some of their eyes get really big. And I wonder about how we instill this sense of confidence in people that really what selling is about, in my view, is helping. And if you can create this opportunity for people to constantly be on lookout for where they can find opportunities to help and use that to their own advantage to build their own careers, is that a way of framing this in a positive way that makes people more excited and feel more opportunity is before them, rather than having this big kind of daunting notion of everyone being a salesperson? I'm curious about that. Anyone have a thought on that?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned with the research, maybe you went offline to help Tim get online, but when we Google the thousands of people that are on our platform with all varying levels of success, most of them failing, and failing if the definition is I want to exceed. We consider a good, successful independent contractor somebody who can make 20% more on their own than what they would through a traditional employment arrangement. And so the goal of self-employment is not to survive. The goal is to thrive and to create an environment around yourself in which you're actually enjoying a higher quality of life, not just keeping your head above water. And as I indicated, the number one barrier to success is fear of sales. They just are not good at positioning themselves, pricing themselves, knowing how to go about that. And I think we have to be careful, because entrepreneurism is not synonymous with salesmanship. But as with most life skills, the more persuasive and effective as a salesman you can be, then you tend to go further faster.
Tim, you want to jump in on that?
No, I certainly don't disagree with what Chris says for that tranche of the gig economy workers.
Okay. One thought I had was around Parisa, for if you want to just give us a little more detail in terms of what you think we can expect government policy to do around re-regulating or redefining the term gig worker, and who qualifies for different kinds of benefits from a government perspective. What does that need to look like, and where do you see that going?
Yeah, I mean, certainly not my domain expertise. I'm a bit more American in my orientation than Canadian. And I think what will lead it on the American side is not going to be government as much as it's going to be healthcare and private healthcare institutions. We go about trying to provide health spending accounts for our members in Canada or in the States. And the biggest problem is that the entire healthcare industrial complex is set up to sort of de-risk the situation based on masses of people. So, companies with 5,000 or 10,000 employees have really attractive health benefits because that there's non-smokers, there's young people, there's a mix, and so the actuary tables can be adjusted. When you get into individuals and pre-existing conditions, the health insurance providers are woefully inadequate to determine. So what we're looking at, and we're seeing it with some of the bigger social platforms like a Lyft, for example, is these ad hoc unions, if you will, of gig workers who are joining together to qualify for certain health benefits or sick leave. It's not just health benefits, but paid time off and things like that. Some of these quality of life issues. But I'm not looking for the government to really solve the problem as much as just get out of the way and stop preventing private enterprise from fixing the problem.
How about you, Parisa?
One thing that I want to say is that, so currently we have basically two categories, self-employed or employees, but first of all, self-employment are a quite heterogeneous group, and there are some gig workers that not certainly are self-employed, but they are not either should be considered as employees. And One thing that I think and they are located in a gray area, and one thing that is really important, first we need to understand who are these workers, and one of the challenges is that still we are not sure about how to define gig economy, who should be included. Even when you look at estimates, even for Canada or other countries, there are significant variations because each surveys or each organization or even government government organization, they look at a specific measure, or they use some specific definition for how to define gig workers. So we need to come up with a data and a better definition of how to define gig workers, and collect enough data about these individuals to be able to classify them. But definitely we need probably more than two group, employees and self-employed. We need at least one more group to define individuals, and then set some labor laws and think about how to create a long-term social assistance program, not necessarily social assistance program, I mean employment insurance program that can support individuals. Because right now when we look at, for example, self-employed individuals, some of them they report negative income, and if we want to look at, for example, eligibility by hours, it doesn't fit, we can fit them into the model that we have. So maybe some models like smoothing income, something like that might be possible. For example, when there is a reduction in income, government can provide support. But any decision that we make and any laws that, because regulation is going to affect how we shape the economy, how workers and employees are going to interact with each other. We need to be very careful when we set regulations, and when we set up an insurance program when we create an insurance program to support workers, because any decision can have some consequences, and it's going to reshape the labor market and decision that businesses and individuals are going to make. We need better data.
Okay, so who's responsible for that data, and where's it going to come from?
And definitely
Yeah,
sorry.
Go ahead. No, you can go ahead.
In terms of data, definitely organization like Statistics Canada is responsible for collecting data. So by adding more categories and type of work, they need to look at the labor market, type of activities, even the ones that no one could consider as type of employment. It could be considered as a hobby in the past, and now can be considered as type of employment. So broadening the categories of jobs that individuals may get involved in the labor market activities, and providing, adding question to the survey to collect the data can be helpful.
Well, we have 2 more minutes. Anyone else want to jump in on terms of data?
Jump in on that one.
Yeah.
I want to jump in on that. Because just because we have public policy doesn't mean it's adequate. So, we talk about healthcare, and although we have public healthcare, we don't have pharmacare or dental care, which has an impact on lower paid workers. Secondly, perhaps rather than defining a gig economy, we look at actually income of individuals and deal with it through the current taxation system, so that it doesn't matter if your job is, a computer programmer or a pizza delivery guy. It's how much income you make. And then public policy can be based on those figures when we have the income figures of people, and base it in the kind of, because taxes are neither good nor bad. They're just a way to pay for the kind of society we want. When we have that information, then we can have that more fulsome discussion of what democracy means in 2021.
Chris, I think I'm going to give you a last word, but you've got about 60 seconds to make it.
Well, like I said, the role of government in this is the thing I'm least qualified to talk about. I know that I spend most of my day counseling with people who are transitioning from full-time employment into gig employment. And The learning curve is unfortunately steeper than I would like, and I think that that is a combination of we've over glamorized hustle culture, and entrepreneurship has been overly glamorized. And I always like to say that joining platforms like Communo will not make it easy, but it can make it easier, because much like what the unions did in the onset of the Industrial Revolution, communities are now helping gig workers band together. You don't have to make all the mistakes yourself. You just have to find people that are on similar journeys and are willing to share. And I've been very, very, we call our platform Communo, off of the derivative of a commune. And I have just been delighted with people's willingness to share and to coach and to mentor and to communicate and to lend their skills to others' weaknesses and vice versa. So I actually have great optimism that together we're going to figure it out. And I think it's going to change the way that work works over the next decade.
Thank you. Thank you. That's an excellent way to end. Thank you all for participating in this session. And we will be, by the way, we have recorded the session, so it will be available for anyone else who wants to watch it offline or not in real time. Now we're going to all move back to the swap card platform. If everyone wants to do that, we are good to go back to the wrap-up session there. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you on the other side. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.